Hey, good morning, good morning. Happy Tuesday morning and welcome back to Morning Musings. Now I got to get pardon me, got to get right into it because I want to go over one more time. Try to be brief here, but I want to go over one more time in the connection of the dots between Isaiah 2, Luke 23, and today's 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. That's to bring us tomorrow to Isaiah 2 through 4, Luke 23, 2 Thessalonians 1, and Revelation chapter 6. So, very, very quickly, I'll try to make this as brief as possible so that it doesn't seem too repetitious. Isaiah chapter 2, 9 through 11, Isaiah 2, 19 to 21. When I make reference to 19 to 21, I'm not excluding verses 9 through 11 because they say the same thing. I'm just doing it for brevity. Okay. Isaiah 2, 19 to 21, the last days, day of the Lord, when men could run to the mountains, hide in the caves, cry to the rocks, fall on us, save us from the day of the Lord, from the great day of the Lord, when the Lord arises to shake the earth mightily. Now, a little more information about this day of the Lord of Isaiah chapter 2. Remember, it would be a day of famine or a time of famine. Isaiah chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. And it shall be in that day. You see, it's critical, folks, to follow the use of the term in that day in Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, because that little term ties the entire discourse together as a united discourse. You know, it can't be broken up and divided up, pardon me, and gaps of thousands of years inserted nilly-willy here and there and here and there. It's a united discourse. So the day of the Lord, this last day's day of the Lord of Isaiah 2, 19 through 21, would be a time of famine. Verse 13, it would be the time in which the Lord would arise to judge the elders, the leaders of his people. Next point, it would be the time of the war, when Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword, which Jesus applied along with, Psalms and other passages that use the same terminology, but that doesn't mean he wasn't using Isaiah 2. Remember, in Luke 23, he quotes from Isaiah 2, 19 to 21, and applies it to AD 70. Therefore, when he echoes the war or references the war in Isaiah 3, 18 to 24, and says, in that day Israel's men shall fall by the edge of the sword, and in Luke 21, verse 24, he echoes that direct language, having already echoed, all right, or is about to echo, Isaiah. Then we have no reason, we have no discourse or recourse to say, oh, well, Isaiah, yeah, your men shall fall by the edge of the sword in the last days, day of the Lord. And yeah, AD 70 was a day of the Lord, and it occurred in the last days, but Jesus wasn't really using Isaiah 3. Although in Luke 21, 28 to 31, he does use it directly. So, then Isaiah chapter 4, verse 1, in that day the branch of the Lord, that's the Messiah, the the living, beautiful thing, the branch of the Lord. Okay, Isaiah 4, verse 1, shall be glorious, and the fruit of the field shall be glorious. Verse 4, in that day the Lord shall purge from Jerusalem the blood guilt of the city by the spirit of judgment and the spirit of fire. What is this? Pardon me. This is the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. Okay. Oh, by the way, Isaiah 4:5 and following, in that day the Lord shall establish a tabernacle for dwelling for all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. This is the Messianic temple. The last days Messianic temple. Then in Luke chapter 23, Jesus, who's being led out to his unjust death, predicts the day of the Lord of Isaiah chapter 2. The last day's day of the Lord of Isaiah 2-4 would be to avenge the blood of the martyrs, including Jesus. And Jesus applied Isaiah to the impending judgment on Jerusalem. Now then, we've already seen in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, Paul's writing to the church at Thessalonica, being persecuted for their faith. Paul reminds them that they're suffering the same thing that their brethren in Judea suffered at the hands of the Jews, who both killed the prophets, they killed the Lord, and they do, Paul said, they do kill the apostles and the prophets, pardon me, of Jesus, and they forbid the Gentiles to come into the kingdom. And the wrath of God has come upon them to the uttermost. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, 14-16. What's Paul saying? Israel had killed God's people, the prophets. They killed Jesus. Now they were persecuting the apostles and the prophets. But judgment, the vindication of that suffering, was coming very soon. Now in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, he's writing to that same church who is being persecuted for their faith. And he says, it is a righteous thing with God to repay with tribulation those who are troubling you. Who was it persecuting them? Well, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 is the Jews. Acts chapter 17, it was the Jews stirring up, not only doing the persecuting, but stirring up the people in the marketplace, causing them to persecute the church. They probably didn't even know why. The Jews did. And so Paul says it's a righteous thing with God to repay with tribulation those who are troubling you, same Greek word, philipsis, and to give to you who are being, present participle, troubled, relief with us when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven. In flaming fire, taking vengeance on those that do not know God, that do not know the gospel, who have never obeyed the gospel. These shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and the glory of his presence. A direct citation of Isaiah chapter 2, verses 19-21. Wait a minute. Isaiah chapter 2-4, a prediction of the last days, day of the Lord, when men could run to the mountains, hide in the caves, cry to the rocks, fall on us. Hide us from the presence of the Lord, from the glory of his presence. Jesus quoted from that very verse and applied it to AD 70. Now here's Paul, writing in the same context of persecution. Remember, Isaiah foretold that at the last days, day of the Lord would avenge the blood guilt of Jerusalem by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of fire. That's vindication of the martyrs at the day of the Lord. The last days, day of the Lord. And Paul quotes, listen to this, Paul quotes from the very same identical verse that Jesus, by the consensus of virtually all scholars. Now, like I said, there may be some scholar out there, some commentator out there that takes a different tack. I haven't found it. Doesn't mean that. Doesn't mean there's not one out there. But of the multitudinous commentators that I have examined so far, and believe you me, that is a bunch of them, I have not found one that disagreed. Now, I found one that tried to moralize the text and completely ignore the audience relevance, completely ignore that it was the Thessalonians being persecuted, completely ignore that Paul was promising those living, breathing human beings being persecuted for their faith, totally ignoring the fact that Paul promised them relief from that persecution, said not one word about any of that. He just said, one of these days, the Lord is going to make everything right with us at the end of time. Folks, that's not exegesis. It may be commentary, but it's not exegesis. So, back to the issue. Isaiah 2, last day's day of the Lord, vindication of the martyrs. Jesus applied Isaiah chapter 2 to the impending fall of Jerusalem, meaning the fall of Jerusalem was to be the last day's day of the Lord for the vindication of the martyrs. Here is Paul quoting from the same identical verse that Jesus applied to AD 70. So the hermeneutical question is, upon what basis, what is the exegetical, contextual, and contextual basis upon which anyone could say, well, yeah, Jesus applied Isaiah 2 to the coming judgment of AD 70, but Paul had an end of time coming in mind. Just exactly where is that evidence? Some years ago, I went to the Oklahoma Christian College, now called OCUSA, Oklahoma Christian University of Science and Arts, I think is what it's called now. Because I wanted to read every single commentary I could get a hold of on 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. Now, that was in addition to all the commentaries I had in my own library, and I've added to it since then. No one doubted. Of all of them that commented on any connection between New Testament passages and Old, and that includes men such as Gregory Beale, New Testament commentary on the use of the Old Testament, New Testament theology, etc. No one denies that Paul was citing the same verses from Isaiah that Jesus applied to AD 70. So once again, the hermeneutical question is, upon what basis could anyone legitimately, logically say Jesus was applying it to AD 70, Paul's applying it to something radically different? There is no justification for that, folks. And that means that the coming of the Lord of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 was in AD 70. I'm out of time. Now, as promised, tomorrow we're going to be dealing with Isaiah 2, Luke 23, 2 Thessalonians 1, and Revelation chapter 6. This is so good. I'll see you on the flip side.